Hey YouTube, I finally filled the 125 up with water and added plants. Stay tuned. My name is Jake and this is Raccoon Creek Aquatics, where we cover aquarium topics in general and planted tanks in particular. I have a lot of exciting topics planned, so if you're new to this channel, consider subscribing so you can follow along. Also, make sure you click that notification bell so you don't miss any of it. This is episode 6 of a step-by-step setup of a 125 gallon planted tank, and it's finally time to fill the tank with water and add plants. So I mentioned in episode 2 of this series that it's important to rinse fluorite well. Well, I did just that and I still ended up with a bit of a mess on my hands. The water was cloudy at first, but it eventually subsided. I then used a brand new toothbrush to brush off and clean the driftwood, equipment such as heaters, and plants. I just want to make this clear. Please use a brand new toothbrush and not an old used one. I then did several water changes to get rid of the loose sediment. You can see I have good surface agitation on this tank. This will give me adequate gas exchange to give me a good balance of oxygen and carbon dioxide. I'm not running CO2 injection on this tank right now. I might change my mind in the future, but right now I'm sticking to my guns and I'm not running CO2. If I decide to run CO2 in the future, I'll dial down the surface agitation, and here's why. If you're pumping in that CO2 into your water column, you're only going to lose that CO2 through the surface agitation. At this point, I also don't have any plants in this tank that require CO2 to do well. Now it's on to plant stocking. Keep in mind, this is a work in progress. I plan to add rocks for a hardscape, as well as a few more plants. Also, expect many of the plants you currently see in this tank to grow and fill in many of the voids. You can already see new growth in this tank, which is really exciting. Make sure you let me know with a comment down below how you think this tank has turned out so far. One thing beginners need to keep in mind when they're starting their first planted tank is not to freak out when their plants look a little rough at first. It's completely normal for your plants to melt when they're adjusting to their new environment. Take my dwarf sage for example. You can see the old leaves are starting to melt, but there are already new leaves shooting up. This tank currently has 8 plant species. We'll start with the plants in the background. The background is a mix of Sagittaria and Jungle Val. Those of you who keep Jungle Val may have the same observation as me. It doesn't chip well, so it goes through an intense phase of melting before it starts shooting up new growth. I experienced the same thing in my native tank with my Val Americana. Next I have 2 Florida Sunset Crypts. I placed these near the very end of the driftwood. Eventually these will get larger and have a nice reddish coloration. With these Florida Sunset Crypts and the big Java Fern, hopefully it'll give me the look of the driftwood emergent from the plants that I'm looking for. I already mentioned the Java Fern. I have 3 of those total and one of them is a narrowleaf Java Fern. I also have an Anubias Coffeefolia. I really like the unique texture of the leaves of this plant that add interest to this tank. One thing I want to mention is when you're planting a rhizome plant such as a Java Fern or Anubias into a substrate, make sure you don't bury the rhizome. Burying the rhizome can cause it to rot. As we move from left to right in the tank, you'll see dwarf sage. I have this in 2 different locations in the tank. I also have 2 bulbs of red tiger lotus. The different texture and color of this plant will provide the look I'm going for. So I have a quick tip for planting bulbs. Make sure you don't bury the bulb. Simply let it rest on the substrate in the area where you'd like it to grow. Burying a bulb will have the same effect as burying the rhizome of a plant. It'll cause it to rot. If you can't get your bulb to sink, it could be an indicator that your bulb is dead. And finally, the last plant I currently have stocked in the 125 gallon tank is Rotala Rotundifolia. I chose this plant because I thought it would look cool growing in and out of the spiderwood. I also lacked a fast growing plant, so I chose this species. I really like the look of this plant, and in the right conditions, it'll get a reddish hue. You can already see the bright green new growth. So that's what I have in this tank so far. Notice, none of these plant species require CO2 injection, although the tank would look great with it. This tank is a work in progress, so I'm bound to add more hardscape as well as plants. And maybe even CO2 injection down the road. I'll see you next time.